Well, hello, friends, again. This is the second of our meetings that we're calling A Treatise in Cosmic Fire in Depth. Well, we wonder how deeply we can go, maybe always deeper, but this is my way of identifying it as distinct from the other Cosmic Fire classes I have taught and some webinars as well. Actually, the group mind will be working on this, and that will be the method of revelation. But what I'm going to do right now, we had a little misfortune when we tried to meet last time. It could have been because I was trying to do too much on my computer simultaneously, and one of my friends says, well, maybe you didn't have enough bandwidth. But I was constantly being kicked out of the GoToMeeting program, and there was no audio. Well, you can't have much of a meeting if you have no audio and you're not even on the program. So, okay, we had reached this point here where we were discussing Foster Bailey's introduction to A Treatise on Cosmic Fire. And the first program, I think, is pretty good, and you should be able to get something out of it. Now, I'm going to try to finish that program and go on. In other words, the second program will be just me offering some thoughts, and maybe going on to program number 3, because unless I can next week, I have to be traveling. Unless I can offer it at a different time, I cannot offer it on Wednesday night, or, well, maybe I can. I don't know. I'll see. But I'm trying to make up now for the second program that we missed. So this continues to be Foster Bailey speaking. And basically what I'm going to do here, I want to try to identify these things in the best way. So here we go, and let's see if that will work. I like that, rather like that type of bracket. Okay, so here is Foster Bailey speaking. And during the long course of the work, and it was 30 years' work, and that's exactly what was planned. Some people feel, oh goodness, Alice Bailey's work was cut short, and well, it's too bad it was. And they say that of Blavatsky too, that there was to be yet another volume of the Secret Doctrine, in that I think it was the third kind of printing, or the third edition, and she couldn't do it. And some have said, well, Alice Bailey was going to write on Masonic work and other things, and she couldn't do it. But the story goes that it really was a 30 years' work planned. And I must say that immediately upon her passing, other kinds of work began to appear, not really associated with the Tibetan and the Bailey work, but seeming to, in a way, reference it and possibly imitate it. And in my view, I mean, people can get something out of anything, but in my view, the quality descended. So, as the Tibetan said at that time, I'm not looking for any new stenographers. And I think we should take him to heart. So from approximately 1950, or let's just say December of 1949, when Alice Bailey passed, another 75 years would be our waiting period before the third and last of the set of bridging treatises would be written. And now he tells us around the year 2025. I think he doesn't want to be too specific because there's something in the mind of many people where they want to be the stenographer. They want to be the one that's taking this down. And we don't even know exactly how the Tibetan will work when in another 5 or so years he begins to write the third installment. We do know that it will have something to do with astrology at first. It seems to me, at least he mentioned it in the astrological context. Okay, so during the long course of the work, the minds of the Tibetan and AAB became so closely attuned that they were, in effect, so far as much of the production of the teaching was concerned, a single joint projecting mechanism. That's an amazing thought. The story goes that they used to work together in olden times, maybe in China, where the Tibetan, the one whom we now call the Tibetan, was the observing Chela on the higher planes who made report to the master, and the master must have been Master Kuthumi, or the one we now call Master Kuthumi. We don't know who he was at the time, but I think his mastership probably was, taken early on in the period after Christ. But in the East, it's my impression. So anyway, the Tibetan worked on the higher planes, giving report regarding Alice Bailey on the lower planes, and so they had lots of practice. A single joint projecting mechanism, even to the end. They worked out some kind of English that was suitable. The Tibetan's English at first was very old. Maketh, breaketh, taketh. It was Elizabethan in its nature. And that itself might be a hint as to where he's been. He said he had a couple of European incarnations. I suspect if he counted the one in Greece with Pythagoras, then we have only one more to look for. But maybe he did not consider that a European incarnation. I don't know. There was no Europe per se at that time. So even to the end, AAB often spoke of her amazement at the glimpses that she obtained through contact with the Tibetan's mind. I think we may have read this before, but it's worth it again. Of limitless vistas of spiritual truths, which she could not possibly have otherwise contacted, and often of a quality she could not possibly express. So she was given a rare insight into where the ageless wisdom could go, and the fact that we were just dealing with the preliminaries of the ageless wisdom, but it's quite a lot and quite enough for us at first. But on it goes. The secret of the secrets of the entire universe, this particular universe, are contained in the ageless wisdom. And who's to say if even anything is truly known in Shambhala? I mean, Shambhala has to do with our present planetary logos and our Earth scheme, although there may be equivalent Shambhalas in other places, on other planets. But look, there's arms of galaxies and families of galaxies, and who knows how many higher units there are, all with their own arcana, all with their own mysteries. So although what is known in Shambhala seems stupendous to us, it may be very small indeed compared to what the ageless wisdom would be when applied to much larger beings, living beings, and their structures on the way to the, quote, top of the universe, where the universal logos can be found in fullness. And then one day, of course, we discover that we are that being. So often of a quality she could not possibly express. This experience was the basis of her often proclaimed, but frequently little understood assertion that all the teaching she was aiding in producing was only in fact the ABC of esoteric knowledge, and that induces a certain humility, an adjusted sense of right proportion, which we all need when dealing with this material, which can possibly, if wrongly approached, inflate the ego. We don't want that. And that she would gladly abandon any pronouncement in the present teaching when she found better and more deeper esoteric teaching available. And one of the big problems with modern theology and the dogmas of the various religions is they are ruled by the concrete mind and are under the impression and the oftentimes forced impression upon others that that is the entirety of truth, when it's just the tiniest beginning. Clear and profound as the teaching actually is in the books published in her name, the truths imparted are so partial and subject to later revelation and expansion that this fact, if constantly remembered, will give us a second much-needed safeguard against the quality of the concrete mind, which constantly tends to produce sectarianism, and I guess we could say that would be humility. That's what we need, an adjusted sense of right proportion. When you look at Leo and Libra together, Leo at first will have the tendency to exaggerate the personality and its prominence as if the world revolves around it. And Libra, in which the sun, the normal ruler of Leo, in which the sun falls, will give that sense of needed proportion. At the very beginning of the joint effort, and after careful consideration, this is in, I think, November of 1919, it was decided between the Tibetan, DK, and AAB that she, as the working disciple on the outer plane, should shoulder as much as possible of karmic responsibility on that plane, and that the teaching should go to the public over her signature. Well, right away, that prevents the kind of genuflection we would have if we're always speaking, as they say, in bated breath about the masters. So, offered under AAB, and if people want to know more about where it really came from, when I first ran into these books, I was astonished. I said, how can one person write all this? And I little realized what was behind it, but soon found out. And so, every effort to make the teaching not look extravagant or inflated, allowing glamour and illusion to creep in. There are some teachings out there that really are bombastic, and they have allowed the glamour of inflated importance to creep in, and here Alice Bailey's trying to give us the proportional attitude, which is the way of sanity, you might say. Okay, so this involved the burden of leadership in the esoteric field. She was definitely a leader. She had the Ray 1 personality and the Ray 1 soul, Ray 1 mind, but very much, I think, somehow along the love line of the second ray, or maybe the wisdom line. It's hard to say. But I don't think so much along the meticulous entirety line of the second ray, which the Tibetan expressed. This involved the burden of leadership in the esoteric field and precipitated attack and condemnation from persons and organizations whose positions and activities were more Piscean and authoritarian. So basically, you know how it was done. It was made so at first her association with the Theosophical Society in Crotona, California. I'm not sure, it probably was maybe the Los Angeles Crotona and not the Ojai Crotona, not sure. But I think Los Angeles, her presence was not welcomed anymore because she made the naive mistake of saying when a picture of Master Kuthumi was presented, oh, that's my master. Well, okay, it probably was, but the problem was she said so. And these things have to be pretty much kept to oneself, lest jealousy and disbelief and all the rest of it arise. I have a bunch of thises here, you see, but I intend to fill this in with some written commentary. But right now I'm trying to get on with the show so that we can get into the book, the first part of which I think is quite difficult, having to do with matter, and actually we're much more in the consciousness solar system at this time, and even our planetary logos working on his second degree is concerned more with sensitivity and consciousness than he is with the material factors. The entire platform upon which esoteric teaching stands, therefore, the entire platform upon which esoteric teaching stands before the public today has been liberated from the limitations and follies, that's such a good word, of mystery, glamour, claim-making, and impracticality by the position taken by the Tibetan and Alice Bailey. It used to come off a bit hocus-pocus-like, and unbelievable and incredible in the original meaning of that word, not credible. And it's been given a great dignity, I would say, by their work, and it's going to continue. We don't know whether the amanuensis will be Alice Bailey. A lot will depend upon the ray on which the Tibetan intends to concentrate as a sub-ray of his second ray. The stand taken against dogmatic assertion has helped to establish a new era of mental freedom for the students of the progressively unfolding revelation of the ageless wisdom. If you meet anybody that says the last word has been spoken by the dogma to which they adhere, well, the person is subject to the limitations and the fears of the concrete mind. Okay. So this is, let's just say, her work takes us beyond dogma and rigidity. And of course, she was an experienced, she born certainly as, it seemed, as an initiate of the second degree, or maybe she had a recapitulation. That's kind of in the autobiography, how she appears quite intense and idealistic and a fiery preacher to the men in the army of the time and so forth. So, it looks like a recapitulation there of the second degree, or born that way in the second degree, and easily taking the third degree in this particular life, and, so sacrificial and so much given to renunciation that obviously there's preparation for the fourth degree there, just as in the life of Roberto Assagioli. It seemed that those two were going rather parallel, and it's not my business and I cannot really say, but I try to evaluate. Foster Bailey was another one. I'm not sure that he had reached that point, but maybe he had, because he was due, says the Tibetan, to take up the kind of position as secretary to Master Morya as Alice Bailey took to the Chohan Kutumi. So their relationships to their respective masters were similar. Okay, beyond dogma, and we owe a lot to that. The age-old method of arriving at truth by the process of accepting new authorities and comparing them with previously established doctrines, while of undoubted value in the training of the mind, is gradually being transcended. Well, we're always trying to, nothing is really satisfying in the world of form, and we have to make our way into the spirit. And this means that every teacher is limited. And, I've been raised in the arts, and my life was in the arts, and you hear many stories of piano teachers, voice teachers, teachers of instruments, saying in humility to a very promising student, look, I've taken you as far as I can go, and I've taught you what I can teach you. Now you need a more advanced teacher. So there is always a tendency to move on, and sometimes it's quite a search, and sometimes you really are restless and don't find a more advanced teacher at all. You just find someone else, and if you're on the sixth ray, you hang on to that someone else until something about that presentation proves to you its limitations. So it is an age-old method, but the whole idea of accepting new authorities, we have to learn how to accept the authority of the soul. That is what is important. And it's our own higher self, which essentially, in its depth, as the one being, which, there's only one being, although there are limitations placed upon that one being through some kind of process of emanation. But if we strip everything away and all of our limited misperceptions of what we are, we will find ourselves to be pure being itself. So it does have value, he says. He's not really criticizing it, but something new is coming in. And it's reliance upon oneself spiritually, I would say, reliance upon oneself spiritually. I think we all have to learn how to do that. And, well, you know how it is with students. You ask a question, and now these days they'll go find the answer in the Tibetan, they'll cut and paste it, and there it is. And they'll say, well, he says it so much better than I, but that's not the point. The point is to find within yourself the best answer you can provide, and that's the way you grow. So in the Moria Federation, and I think in any decent esoteric school, we want to hear what the student thinks, even though, none of us can equal what the Tibetan thinks, and he probably feels the same way about the Christ and Sanat Kumara and so forth. What can you do on your own? How much of the mountain of vision have you climbed yourself? In its place is emerging in both the religious and philosophical worlds a new capacity to take the scientific position. Well, he's going to emphasize the fifth ray, it looks like. Spiritual, because, in the Aquarian age, that's the way it'll be. It'll be the study of the spiritual science, and it'll be the science of initiation. Aquarius brings through only one ray that the Tibetan discusses. Sometimes he doesn't discuss the other rays that the constellations bring, but he will say that it's bringing in the fifth ray. And although Leo is the major fifth ray conduit at this time, it won't be for long, and Aquarius will take its place, which seems only natural. So it's going to be an age of scientific spirituality. And, already you can see the signs of it. We're looking forward to it. And we've learned a lot in Pisces through devotion and through emotion. And now it's time to apply the mind to the spiritual pursuit. Spiritual teaching will be increasingly, excuse me, sorry for those noises, increasingly accepted as hypothesis and hypothesis, to be proved less by scholasticism, Master or Francis Bacon, he certainly rebelled against scholasticism, historical foundation and authority, and more by the results of its effect upon the life lived and its practical usefulness in solving the problems of humanity. So we look to its effectiveness and the way it can be used in life. I talked to a philosopher once who said, well, I gave up the normal pursuit of philosophy and decided to study the Yoga Sutras. But I couldn't find in them what I was looking for, and so I came back to philosophy. So, obviously, this particular individual, very talented, was looking for a mental formulation, and the Yoga Sutras were extremely practical. Do this and you will see the result. And I suggest to esoteric students or students of esotericism that they do it and see what is the result when they live the life applying what they're learning, and find perhaps that in the Yoga Sutras and books like that, there's a great practicality about solving their problems and the wider problems of humanity. Heretofore, advanced esoteric teaching has almost invariably been obtainable only by the student's acceptance of the authority of the teacher, varying degrees of personal obedience to that teacher, and pledges of secrecy. Well, okay, we know the story of Milarepa and Marpa. Marpa was a very tough first-ray teacher, and he put Milarepa through all kinds of difficulty, trying to break his lower ego, not the higher ego, but the lower ego that is rebellious against true occult obedience. And Milarepa accepted it, build the stupa here. No, not here, build it there. No, not there, build it here. No, not there, build it in another place. That was what Marpa put Milarepa through. And Milarepa eventually saw what the whole thing was about and became, the great yogi, saint of Tibet, able to accomplish amazing things and able to teach, and he really went against his own tendencies because he had almost fallen into the black magical work out of love of his family and revenge for some attack upon his family. It was a sad story. But anyway, as the new Aquarian dispensation progresses, these limitations will disappear. The thing about, the sun is the symbol of your own authority, and Leo goes along with it. Now, the sun is in detriment in Aquarius, which means that this idea of accepting authority and of putting authority first rather than your own will be gradually worn away. It will be your own authority that is important, and a person will have a much more decentralized position. The personal relationship of the disciple to the master remains. It's been built up over many, many lives, and except the discipleship is not just a question of the readiness of the student, it's a question of ancient relation. The family members of the past become the members of the ashram. And many, I talked to the last living disciple that I was introduced to by my friend, and he talked to her, and over many sessions we talked to her, and she really did have the sense that DK had been her grandfather in earlier times. It's certainly possible because naturally relationships in groups evolve. And in this particular case, you have somebody still, looking over, trying to help someone, but on a higher level that's not bound to physical, familial, elemental relationships. So limitations will disappear. The personal relationship will remain, but already discipleship training has been attempted in group formation, and that's really something that was an important difference in the way the theosophical approach was offered and the Bailey approach. Well, they're both theosophical, the divine wisdom to understand God, philosophically and as divinity. They're both theosophical, but there was evolution there and less personal ambition than in the first offering. Probably you couldn't help it. At first people didn't know so much about the group possibilities. And that's one thing the Tibetan really emphasized over what Blavatsky, under his guidance, offered, and that was the group nature of progress. The record of one such experiment and attempt to use this New Age method has been made available to the public in the book entitled Discipleship in the New Age. Okay, that's group training, and so much of the success or failure of the students gathered there depended upon how well they could adapt to group progress. The fifth law of the soul is called the law of group progress. You would think it would be ruled by Aquarius. It's not. It's ruled by Capricorn, the law of elevation, but there's a strong Aquarian dimension to it. We move better and faster and more wisely together these days, that rather than filled with spiritual ambition on our own. So there is a record here, and this is what the Tibetan offered, which gives the direct personal instructions by the Tibetan to a selected group. They came to the arcane school. Sometimes he had Alice Bailey write them, and she didn't know at all who they were, So he had in mind to gather some of those he had had association with before and see if this group experiment could not possibly be worked through and be made successful. It wasn't entirely successful, but the book Discipleship in the New Age was a great success, he said, and use it to gather people into the ashram. In A Treatise on Cosmic Fire, the Tibetan has given us what H.P. Blavatsky prophesied he would give, namely, the psychological key to the secret doctrine. There are all these keys. They're found in the footnotes, mathematical, pracritic, atomic. I can't name them all right now, but the psychological key is one of the really important ones. We'll get to that particular footnote, and it'll be quite amazing the way it's possible to. Obviously, there's a magical key, Yeah, there's quite a few, maybe 10, maybe rather more, keys to the secret doctrine. So psychology is so important in the New Age, and especially in the English-speaking countries with their second-ray soul, like America, United States, and United Kingdom. So it's coming up, a deep and profound understanding of who the human being really is and what human beings are to each other. HPB stated that in the 20th century, a disciple would come who would give the psychological key to her own monumental work. Well, okay. That's HPB's monumental work, and I think what we've got there is maybe the foreshadowing or the seeing ahead to the time that Alice Bailey would come along and be used by the Tibetan, who was also, in his own way, helping, providing much material for HPB. The secret doctrine on which treatise the Tibetan worked with her, I suppose that means HPB, and Alice A. Bailey worked in complete recognition of her own task in this sequence. So, it it's a sad thing when something of such great value as the Bailey work comes along, and then the society, which was supposed to be, the foundation of brotherhood in the New Age, founded in 1875, the same year that Tibetan took his mastership, interesting, that the Theosophical Society would so reject the work of Bailey, and just human, disbelief and jealousies and all that kind of thing entered in, like, who are you to say such a thing? But, there were a lot of closet-by-night readers of the Alice Bailey work, even among those who more professionally in the outer world had to say, well, we're Theosophists, we stick with Bailey. We stick with HPB. They're reading Bailey by night, It's like that funny song about the health food person, who insists on health food, and everybody thinks this is all that the person eats. And the name of the song is "At Night I'm a Junk Food Junkie," raiding the refrigerator for all the things you could not show people you really love to eat. Anyway, they learned a lot, and at one point, DK said, look, there's this book at the feet of the masters, and you will see from the publication of my books with Bailey that it came first. And he says, I don't have any interest in saying that for any reason of assertion or to put anybody down, or not to value. But Leadbeater's book was partially derivative from what the publication of maybe Initiation, Human and Solar. So, people are people, and there are all of these human reactions to each other. The more we discover we are one being and that we're all living through each other, the more helpful we will become, and the more rapidly we will accept the great knowledge and wisdom of the ageless teaching. And may that day come soon, so that the sometimes childish conflicts between the different spiritual groups can cease, and the facts of the matter be discussed in daylight and with a calm mind and interest in the truth, and not in necessarily defending some teaching. Now, the next part is, I think, by Alice Bailey herself, as kind of a forward to Cosmic Fire. And I don't know. I did a lot of work, probably 1,100 or even almost 1,200 pages of written commentary, and that's on the Makara website, and then another 100 pages of some pretty obscure material from the old commentary, and that's on video. Okay, I just got impatient, and I said, look, I can't do this anymore. I can't simply write this out. I have to talk it out. So those things are available, but I'm just not sure that I did the very beginning of the book. Maybe somewhere, I think, yes, I did from this point on, but maybe not the introduction which Foster Bailey offered. See, because here we are on page 3, and here are the introductory postulates, maybe, and I did comment on these. So, in a way, what I can see is that my commentary even begins later than this, okay? So maybe I really didn't comment very much on these early introductory things, possibly because I said foolishly, whoa, Foster Bailey wrote that, and Alice Bailey wrote that, and I'm interested in what the Tibetan himself wrote. But now I have a chance to correct that foolish attitude. Anyway, here we are 70 years ago. This is Tunbridge Wells, where it was written, and at least from Foster Bailey's point of view, and that's in England. And now what Alice says as the foreword, let's see. This treatise on cosmic fire has a five-fold purpose in view. That's your upward-pointing star, the star of initiation, and one of the stars of the soul along with the triangle, and the number 5 representing the fifth kingdom, which is the kingdom of souls. So the number 5 is not unexpected. So first, what are the purposes? To provide a compact and skeleton outline of a scheme of cosmology, philosophy, and psychology, which may perhaps be employed for a generation as a reference textbook and may serve as a scaffolding upon which more detailed instruction may later be built as the great tide of evolutionary teaching flows on. Well, if she's looking at this as an outline, a skeleton outline, imagine this book of almost 1,300 pages, a skeleton outline. Matter of fact, I don't have my copies of Cosmic Fire here, but what I want to see, I want to see this and how long it really is. 1,283 pages. And those are pages, not the Roman numeral introductions. Okay, so we're really dealing here with 1,300 pages, aren't we? And that's an amazing work. And out of that, as stated, came other books as he went into greater detail, breaking out or expanding what he had given earlier. So this is, in terms of Roman numerals, this is kind of number 12. So it's pretty close to 1,300 pages is what we're talking about in this book. And when she uses the word generation, I just hope that she means a spiritual generation of a duration unknown, because I can just see how masters themselves could study certain things the Tibetan has written, and that they would need to. Just the way the Tibetan reports that masters study the third and fourth books of the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. Patanjali was a great master, maybe 10,000 years ago. It's a name that seems to be adapted, and there are a number of Patanjalis, and people take certain names. But this particular master, about 10,000 years ago, I understand, and masters study his book 3 and book 4. I guess they know what's in book number 1 and book number 2. Okay. So, to provide a compact skeleton outline of a scheme of cosmology, philosophy, psychology, which may be employed, I hope, for a spiritual generation, and I hope it's still going on, because I just don't know many people who have mastered what is in A Treatise on Cosmic Fire, a book written, as it is said, for initiates, and written primarily along the first ray and the third ray. And it may serve, as scaffolding, allows you to see the outline of what you're trying to build, serve as a scaffolding upon which more detailed instruction may later be built as the great tide moves on. Well, you see that the book, A Treatise on White Magic, which, by the way, is also commented upon and can be found on YouTube and can be found on Makara, you see that that's some 600 pages long. And the section on magic in this book is maybe 20 pages long. So he's certainly, or 30, he did expand upon what he wrote here. So this was a seminal book. The seed of future unfoldment was there. So that's the first thing, an outline. And, as strange as it seems, because to us it looks so complex, and it looks so detailed, and the word generation, if we count a physical generation of 20 or 25 years, it doesn't look like enough. That would mean approximately that in 1950, people stopped studying the book because they didn't need it anymore. I consider it a tremendous resource. After all, the psychological key to the secret doctrine. So we have to try to understand what the word generation means. Now, the second thing here, second purpose, to express that which is subjective in comprehensible terms. And by subjective, we don't mean subtle. Subtle and subjective are two different things. I think not subtle, but subjective. The etheric body is subtle. The astral body is subtle. The mental vehicle is subtle, made of more refined matter than the atomic matter of the matter of the lowest three subplanes. But subjectivity begins on the higher mental plane and not on the 18 planes below. So it's still considered quite material. Those lower 18 subplanes involving the 4 levels of the concrete mind, the 7 levels of the astral plane, and the 4 levels of the etheric physical plane. It is an elucidation. Okay, wait. And to point out the next step forward in the understanding of the true psychology. And so if he writes a book or 2 books on psychology, he's really breaking out the subject and expanding it for us. Because, this book has many psychological hints and factors and symbols, but it's nothing like the breakout of it in the 2 books on psychology. And then, of course, in White Magic, there's also plenty of psychology. It is an elucidation of the relation existing between spirit and matter, which relation demonstrates as consciousness. So there's a trinity here: a life, quality, and appearance. Life and appearance will produce that element we call quality. So on the higher etheric levels of the cosmic physical plane, we have spirit, and below we have matter. Let's see if I can maybe excuse me, take a look here, and through certain charts try to get it correctly. Okay, and this is number F, and here are these diagrams, and these are ones that Atuya has enhanced. And basically, if we consider the lower 18 subplanes as matter, material, and we consider the higher 28 subplanes as subjective, which they are. Now, sometimes subjectivity is referred to the higher 3 subplanes on the mental plane, but anyway, this is the place of the soul. So the interplay between the 28 and the 18, giving us, 46, and then 3 more would make the 49, the soul shines forth here on the higher mental plane. But we discover as we go along that this is more or less, if the soul were a sword, this would be the scabbard of the sword, the temple, Solomon's temple, the egoic lotus, and the causal body, so forth, all equivalent in a way, and that is the consciousness, where consciousness begins. But from another perspective, we should include the 14 subplanes of the spiritual triad as a subjective and soul expression. So then we would have 14 above, 18 below, so that's 42, so is that right? 14 above, no, and 18 below, which would be 32, and then another 15 or so. Or it would be 17, something like that. Anyway, these 14 and maybe these 3. So yeah, it would be 17. So 7 and 7 and 3, 17. That's another way of looking at it, because the true soul, or the true ego, is the spiritual triad. And so this is the realm where will and consciousness blend. And here the egoic lotus on the higher mental plane is more about consciousness per se. It's less in touch with the monad, but it is somewhat, because the monad has dropped its presence into the very center of the egoic lotus and created the jewel in the lotus, which is the presence or extension of the monad within the soul body. So a lot depends on how you count and how you put things together, and the different perspectives from which you see. Okay, so going on here, it is an elucidation of the relation between spirit and matter, which relation demonstrates as consciousness, life, appearance, and quality. Quality and consciousness are equivalent, and basically we have will, love, consciousness, and intelligence. And so it again has to do with the central portion. If you put will and intelligence together, it's somehow evocative of consciousness. It will be found that the treatise deals primarily with the aspect of mind, with consciousness, and with the higher psychology, and less with matter as we know of it on the physical plane. So it almost really, he's leaving the physical plane for the studies of man, and he's taking off etherically, astrally, and mentally, and giving us rare insight in that way. So it's going to be the higher mind, the higher consciousness, and the higher psychology. We wouldn't expect him simply to repeat what can be found in a good psychological textbook. It's as if that lower level of matter, which is the fourth level in a way, because we have mind, emotion, ether, and then the denser aspects, which can be considered gaseous, liquid, and solid, that man himself is turned loose upon those to learn what he can learn, and he's already learned a lot. It's the number 4. The fourth kingdom of nature is the human kingdom, and it studies under the law of correspondence very much what's going on the fourth sub-level of the personality, which is the densest level, the 3 lower subplanes. The danger involved, I guess, we always have to, we don't think it could possibly be dangerous until we're in a situation and we see how subtly and effectively the counterforce works. The danger involved in giving out information concerning the various energies of atomic matter is too great. And the race is as yet too selfish to be entrusted with these potencies. So there are levels of density. Like, let's just say, if I look at this here, the three lower levels. See, cosmic fire is dealing with subtlety here and subjectivity, and not the very densest levels. So let man learn that. He cannot yet be entrusted with the dense physical potencies, the gaseous, the liquid, and the truly solid and dense. Well, nothing is solid, of course. Man is already, through the able work of the scientists, discovering the needed knowledge with adequate rapidity. So one of the tasks of the masters is to determine how quickly knowledge can be released. I think there was a meeting of the masters. It might have been in 1725, something like that. But anyway, it is the meeting at which Master Mori and Master Kuthumi said, look, humanity needs the ageless wisdom, and somehow they found Master DK to enlist in this process. And many masters says, no, they're not ready. They're not ready. And maybe it's a question now of proving whether those reluctant masters were correct after all. But, the horse is out of the barn, really. So the knowledge is out there, and it can be misused, as Hitler and Himmler, in their inverted esoteric inquiries and groups, misused it, or it can be rightly used as intended. So man is too selfish so far to be really trusted with deep knowledge of the truly physical potencies. Science is giving a sufficient revelation. Man, the emphasis in this book will be found to be laid upon those forces which are less responsible for for the objective manifestation of a solar logos and of man, and only in the first section will the indication be given as to the nature of those energies which are strictly confined to the physical plane. So we will be dealing with dense physical matter and with etheric matter. And of course, the knowledge of etheric matter is scattered throughout the books, but he really does stay away from what man as a scientist can unlock for himself. Okay, the third purpose. You see how I'm going to do this? I'm just going to kind of keep going. We're almost at the hour point, I'll let you know. Thirdly, to show the coherent development of all that is found within a solar system. How very integrated this development is and how much intelligence there is behind it. To demonstrate that everything which exists evolves from the lowest form of life at the densest point of concretion up to the highest and most tenuous manifestation, and that all forms are but the expression of a stupendous divine existence. Well, I don't know what we should call this divine existence. There's three candidates, and maybe they all have a part to play. The universal logos. Oopsie. I'd like to get that correct. No? Okay. Universal logos, the absolute deity, and the absolute or absoluteness. These are the divine existences of which our forms which are familiar and forms which are not familiar are the results. The great spiritual energies have not just created these forms, they have excuse me, in a way they've become these forms. That's quite a mystery. And there we are at 1 hour. Okay, so that's 1 hour, but I'll just keep going because I want to finish this section. And I won't worry about whether this is going to be broadcast on prime time exactly 1 hour in duration. And even then it's not 1 hour in duration because you have to allow for advertising. Well, what would we advertise? I suppose the Bailey books and the work of the various esoteric schools that try to train people. Okay, now, this expression is caused by the blending of two divine aspects through the influence of a third. So I guess he's talking about Atma Buddhi working through Manas, and produces the manifestation which we call form. Well, even some of the very, very subtle, extremely tenuous forms that are maybe even beyond the cosmic physical plane, they are form too. In a way, the only thing that's not form is the Absolute itself. Now, that's actually quite a statement, which means that things that we can hardly even register as existing are forms. But in absoluteness, you have no form whatsoever. All forms are points. I'll get into that. And the absolute is pointless. Okay, a little play on words. So the expression of form, all forms are but the expression of a stupendous divine existence. For us, what is stupendous? Well, even the planetary logos is stupendous. The solar logos is more stupendous. The cosmic logos even more. And the stupendous being called a universal logos, of which there have ever been an infinitude, is the most stupendous with regard to a universe. But if we really think about it, it turns out to be simply the tiniest of things when compared to the absolute infinity. Okay, well, I'm mixing a little bit. I'm crossing over from the book I'm writing and the course that I'm trying to teach, which is called Identify as Being. Okay, this expression is caused by the blending of two divine aspects through the influence of a third. So basically, Shiva and Vishnu are blending. And the third is Brahma. And of course, they have their consorts, which make 6, and taken all together, there must be a central one who is the 7th. Okay, the manifestation we call form, starting it upon its evolutionary cycle in time and space. Well, we go up and we go down, you know. What is this evolutionary cycle? When does it begin? It actually begins with a descent. And then after the descent, a rising again, making a turn and returning to the source. Thus is form brought to the point where it is an adequate medium for the demonstration of the nature of that which we call God. And in this particular case, we're not talking about the absolute deity, and nor are we talking about the utter homogeneity. We're not talking about anything that is beyond the cosmos here. God, as far as we are concerned, is the planetary logos, is the solar logos, the cosmic logos, the supercosmic logos, and finally, the universal logos. And hopefully we can help the matter aspect be adequate to the expression of these very, very high energies. So coherent development is another one of those purposes, those factors. And you certainly get the idea of a tremendous organization which occurs when you read Cosmic Fire, it said, how can this be organized in such a way? There are many people who are looking for inspiration in other ways, and they say, oh, that book Cosmic Fire, it reminds me, what did they say, of a 19th century botany text. It sounds like dullness itself, but for the people who are really into the deep occultism, it's a terribly exciting book. Okay, that's coherent development. And what have we had running before it? To express that which is subjective, not subtle. That's the purpose here. And, okay, I'm just going to, right. And here we have something else. Okay. The skeleton outline. Right. Somehow synthesizing, or at least unifying, these factors, which are very, very subtle and are the study of great systems of thought. So I'm going to also bring this one into focus. Now there are 5 we have to look at. Okay. So these are first, second, and third. Okay. Coherent development. What is the fourth? The fourth purpose of writing a book like this. What is the fourth? To give practical information anent to those focal points of energy which are found in the etheric bodies of the solar logos, the macrocosm, and of man, the microcosm. This is one way of describing macro and micro. Sometimes it could look as if the planetary logos is indeed a macrocosm, and it kind of is, and man a microcosm, but it's all relativity, really. What is the macrocosm for the tiny atom? Is it a great macrocosm, or is it a lesser one? Because the items to be described are so small. As the etheric substratum, which is the true substance underlying every tangible form, is understood, certain great revolutions will be brought about in the domain of science. Just imagine science discovering this. It is so repudiated by those who are hanging on to the strictly physical formulation which the senses report to the intelligence. Certain great revolutions will be brought about in the domain of science, of medicine, and of chemistry. And these even now are being studied, and there are people working with the ethers all the time and working effectively. So there is always an avant-garde. The aura, in a certain sense, health aura, is being measured, it's being photographed. We understand how big it is, what kind of energy it puts out. So we're entering into an etheric age. Gemini and Aquarius are particularly etheric in nature. And when you look at planets, Mercury and Uranus deal with the ethers particularly. Okay. So, the study of medicine, for instance, will eventually be taken up from a new angle, and its practice will be built upon the comprehension of the laws of radiation, of magnetic currents, and of the force centers found in men's bodies and their relationship to the force centers and currents of the solar system. So this is quite a prophecy. Let's see. How do we have this here? So we want to become a doctor, let's say, and our training will be very different. The laws of everything radiates, okay? Everything is magnetic. What is the proportion and how do the force centers operate here? It's almost as if we have the first three rays studied: radiation, first ray; magnetism, second ray, although he does tell us that in some contexts it should be considered, magnetism should be considered of the first ray, and the force centers generically representing the third ray. So let's put that down. Rays 1, 2, 3. And we have radiation, first ray. And we have second, well, magnetism. Okay. All right. And finally, fifthly, the purpose of writing this book. Fifthly, to give some information, hitherto not exoterically imparted, as to the place and work of those myriads of sentient lives who form the essence of objectivity. It looks like he's getting into the Deva and elemental groups. And I'm just going to indicate this. To indicate the nature of those hierarchies of existences, right away we can think of the 12 creative hierarchies, 7 on the cosmic physical plane, really 8, and 5, really 4, which are liberated onto the cosmic astral plane. To indicate the nature of those hierarchies of existences who form out of their own substance all that is seen and known, and who are themselves fire, and the cause of all heat, warmth, life, and motion in the universe. So many hierarchies of existence may be discussed, but here Master DK seems to mean those that are producing a denser form of objectivity. Let's see, I don't know if I meant to do that. I'm going to make this... All right. Okay. Okay. In this way, the action of fire on water, now we're into alchemy, and alchemy is taken up in this book. In this way, the action of fire on water, of heat in matter, whether macrocosmically or microcosmically considered, will be touched upon, and some light thrown upon the law of cause and effect, the law of karma, and its significance in the solar system. Now think about for a minute the number 4. The number 4 rules density. It's right down here. In the lower 18 subplanes, 1 is the mind, 2 is the astral nature, 3 is the etheric nature, and 4 is the density itself. The human kingdom is the 4th, and so there's a particular relation between the four of the human kingdom and the studying of the law of karma, which is also the fourth, and the dense physical plane on which much karma works out. I think that until it has worked out on the dense physical plane, it is not complete. Okay, so alchemy, karma, the fourth law, karma, the fourth of the groupings of subplanes, and the fourth kingdom. These four go together, and we will find that we can link things in relationship by numerical affinity. Here we're looking at it in terms of the number 4, subplanes, law, the 4 lords of karma, the 4 maharajas, the human kingdom, but the maharajas are not so involved here, but the law is the law of cause and effect. So three or four, I think we can get 4 out of it. And now she goes on to sum up the matter. So what do we have so far? We have, moving backwards, we have this, that which produces objectivity, and he's going to give information. I think there's more information here on the Deva Kingdom than in any of the other books. We have a practical understanding of the centers of 4 different types of beings, the solar logos, planetary logos, man, and the atom. Even the atom has centers, but here he stops at man, the microcosm. We're not getting into subatomic particles, are we? Not yet, although maybe something is hinted, perhaps something is hinted. And then, moving backwards, okay, the coherent development, which is operative in all of these different groupings, like solar logos, planetary logos, and man, and even the atom. And then the second one was to express what is subjective and to comprehend what is truly subjective and not just subtle, that is the world of the soul. And then finally the skeleton outline of a scheme of cosmology, philosophy, and psychology. What do I say? Cosmology, philosophy, and psychology. Yeah, that's what the next one is. Okay. So now he's going to sum up the matter, or she's going to sum up the matter. This is Alice Bailey writing. To sum up the matter, the teaching in this book should tend to an expansion of consciousness and should bring about a recognition of the adequacy as a working basis for both science and religion. Think of H.P.B. writing Isis Unveiled in 2 volumes at least, Science and Religion, of that interpretation of the processes of nature which have been formulated for us by the masterminds of all time. Okay. So I'll read it again. To sum up the matter, the teaching in this book should tend to an expansion of consciousness, and we certainly all want that. And we want that to be an intelligent, not just mystical expansion. There are ways to expand through all the vehicles. The intelligence and knowledge can expand, but also the sentiency can expand, and the power of the will can be strengthened, and should bring about a recognition of the adequacy as a working basis for both science and religion of that interpretation of the processes of nature which has been formulated for us by the masterminds of all time. And what does that mean? That means the ageless wisdom. That's what this interpretation of the processes of nature is, as has been formulated by the masterminds of all times. The Buddha, nearby is one, and Patanjali is another, and so forth. It should tend to bring about a reaction in favor of a system of philosophy which will link spirit and matter. So much philosophy today has nothing to do with this type of wisdom. It's the analysis of certain words, and it's caught in language, It is strictly dealing with the intelligence aspect and not with the sentient and the will aspect. A reaction in favor of a system of philosophy which will link both spirit and matter and demonstrate the essential unity of the scientific and religious idea. Now, that's very important. Master Hilarion is much involved in that kind of demonstration, psychics in science, and it's a blending of the second and sixth ray along with the fifth and third ray. The two are at present somewhat divorced, and we are only just beginning to grope our intellectual way out of the depths of a materialistic interpretation. That's so true. So much of the fifth ray has a skeptical attitude towards what it is we're studying here. It must not be forgotten, however, that under the law of action and reaction, which is the karmic law, the long period of materialistic thought has been a necessary one for humanity. Yes, and even Master R, as Francis Bacon probably had to introduce that with the seventh ray, emphasizing the divinity of materiality and the idea of testing every hypothesis coming in under the fifth ray. He had to do that because the mysticism of the Middle Ages had led us too far in the opposite direction. And basically, what we learn is that in all of our studies and in the proper way of living on this planet for the progressive individual, there's got to be balance. So balance is utterly necessary. And if you go too far, then you cannot grow properly. It's like a machine that will shake apart unless it's balanced once it starts to go rapidly. We are now tending, there's the word, okay, sometime. All right. We are now tending to a more balanced view, and it is hoped that this treatise may form part of the process through which equilibrium is attained. Okay. Well, you know what I'm going to do? I think that is one subject, the five purposes of for which this book was written and the studying of this book. So let's go back to the place where we began, and I'll take it down here to where we end. And as soon as I can, unless we do it all together, I'll provide this for you. But I just wanted to make up a little bit for that unhappy electronic thing that occurred, and some 50 of you were gathered, and it was a shame that we could not go ahead and discuss this, but now something here is offered. So, and I'll give you an easy way to find it. So this is the end of number 2. It's kind of solo, and it's on the 27th of September, and we're beginning number 3. And I just have to say, on the question mark of September. And this is after the technical failure of the first meeting. So, okay, friends, I hope we get some idea of why this is important. You can review it. You have your Alice Bailey CD-ROMs. I hope you do, because it's a great way to study. And as you need it, I will send you my commentaries, of which, in relation to which there are about, there are commentaries written for about 1,000 pages or more, actually a bit more than that. And I've gone into great detail, almost too much detail to discuss here, but it can be read, if you will. But how it is for many of us is if we read together, we tend to persist more, and our sense of progress is greater. So maybe that's the way we'll have to do it. But next Wednesday night, I'm going to be on a train. Or am I going to be on a train? Yes, I'm going to be on a train. And if I try to offer you this from a bumpy train, we will have another one of those electronic difficulties, and you will say, another electronic failure. So I'm offering it to you in this way, and hopefully it can be used by you in the right way. I do notice that I had thought that by converting a program, that was the reason that I was thrown off our last program number 2, but I'm a little bit of a daredevil here because I'm still converting and have not been thrown off. So we'll get to the bottom of it, or what GoToMeeting company called a breakdown. Okay. All right, I will convert this one too, and get it out to you, to the people who either registered or were present at the second, and maybe Joe will send this out as well. It's going to require, to study cosmic fire, a lot of patience. Even though it's just the ABCs, and even though Alice Bailey saw these tremendous vistas, it's going to require that we go slow and really absorb. And you say, well, look, I don't really have the third ray so much in my system, and fifth ray is not where I'm at, because there's a lot of fifth ray in this book. We all have the will, of course, and we learn how to use it in this book. But look, we all have to have all the rays. There's one day when, as a human being, even the rays are transcended. So we all have to build in some ray approach. And DK has said of all of us that over the years, in one way or another, we've been on all the rays, or have had access to them through one of our vehicles, or maybe through a personality vehicle, even if the soul ray remains more or less the same. If you're born with, if you come into incarnation on soul ray 4, 5, 6, or 7, it might stay that way, but you never come into incarnation on rays 1, 2, or 3 in the very beginning. So if you are finding your soul ray on 1, 2, or 3, the rays of aspect, there's been a change somewhere along the line, and not in the beginning of your development, no. More as you reach the stage of intellectual capability as regards the third ray, and more as you reach the stage of the first initiation as regards the second and first ray. And there are laws about the changes, with the seventh ray going to the first ray, but sometimes the third ray by special dispensation, as when Master R took his, second and third degree initiates onto the third ray. And then when it comes to the sixth ray, when it comes to the second ray, it can be approached either through ray 6 or ray 4. So if you were on a ray of attribute, 6 or 4, you can go on to the second ray, and interestingly enough, you can go on to the third ray as well from ray 6. And I have to study whether, I think ray 4 takes you on to the second ray, but the sixth ray can take you on to ray 3, or it can take you on to ray 2. When it comes to the first ray as a soul ray, the fifth ray takes you there, and the seventh ray takes you there as well. Rays 5 and 7 take you on to the first ray. So this is all about absorption and synthesis at the end of a cycle, and it has to be studied separately. But let's just say my point is, if you're on ray 1, 2, or 3 in your soul, there's been a change. Because in the beginning, you can only have 4, 5, 6, or 7 as a personality ray. And even in the beginning, you can only have 4, 5, 6, or 7 as a soul ray. You don't come in on soul ray 1, 2, or 3. You might come in on monad 1, 2, or 3, but not soul ray. All right, there's certain laws and rules, and we will prove them to be correct and applicable as we continue with our studies and our applications of the ageless wisdom. So this is about an hour and a half, an hour and 31 minutes approximately, and if you see fit to listen to this before we get together again, then I think it will be of some value to you, and we'll continue with the introduction, taking it down here as far as what the Lord Buddha has said, and some of the great stanzas, only beginning stanzas from the old commentary that will come later in our studies, and then we'll get on into the substance of the book, beginning with ray 3. So, all right, let's move on. Lots of love, many blessings, and I hope you're able to use this. I'll send this out to you probably on Hightail, and you'll be able to grasp it from there. Okay, bye-bye for now. And all I have to do is find the way out of here, right? Okay. All right.